we removed more bone here. This is the lower part of the tympanic cavity with the 3 small bones removed. This is as far as we've come till now. The auditory tube, which is where we're going next, begins at this opening at the front of the tympanic cavity. It passes forwards and medially in a narrow tunnel in the bone. The tunnel is quite short. It starts here and ends here. Only the lateral third of the auditory tube goes through bone. Its medial 2/3 pass through a partial tube of cartilage that's represented by this added material. The cartilage of the auditory tube is attached to the base of the skull. Its medial end projects beneath the mucosa of the nasopharynx. To see the auditory tube itself, we'll go back to a dissected specimen. In this deep dissection of the infratemporal region, we've removed the zygomatic arch, the ramus of the mandible, and all the muscles of mastication. The external auditory meatus and the tympanic cavity have been exposed, as in the previous dissection. Here's the lateral pterygoid plate. The nasopharynx is here. This is the superior pharyngeal constrictor. Its upper border is here. The auditory tube is up here. It's concealed between these 2 small muscles. This one is the levator palati, passing down above the free border of the superior constrictor. This one is the tensor palati, passing downward and forward to go round the hamulus. To see the auditory tube, we'll remove the tensor palati and the lateral pterygoid plate. Here's the cartilage of the auditory tube. Here beneath it is the tube itself. To see the auditory tube all the way to the tympanic cavity, we'll open it along this line and remove this part of the bone. This is the bony part of the auditory tube connecting with the tympanic cavity. This is its cartilaginous part. The narrowest part of the tube is here, where it emerges from the bone. The auditory tube enters the nasopharynx here. We saw its emergence into the nasopharynx from the inside in tape 4. Here's the nasopharynx. Here's the back of the nasal cavity. Here's the soft palate. Here's the opening of the auditory tube. The auditory tube, also called the eustachian tube, is normally closed. It's opened momentarily when we swallow or yawn by the action of the tensor and levator palati muscles. Occasional opening of the auditory tube keeps the air pressure the same on both sides of the tympanic membrane. Now that we've seen the auditory tube, we'll come back to the tympanic cavity. In it, we'll see the 3 small bones, the auditory ossicles, that conduct sound vibrations from the tympanic membrane to the inner ear. So far, we've just had a preview of this lower part of the tympanic cavity. To see the whole of the tympanic cavity, we'll remove the bone that lies above and behind the external auditory meatus. Now, if we look up from below, we can see the full extent of the tympanic cavity. With the auditory ossicles in place, the picture is rather busy. We'll remove them for now, along with the bone here and here, to give ourselves a clear look at the medial wall of the tympanic cavity. These 2 openings in the medial wall both lead to the vestibule of the inner ear. The oval one above, the vestibular window, is occupied by the stapes. This round one below it, the cochlear window, is closed off by an inactive membrane. This bulge, the promontory, is formed by the basal turn of the cochlea. The facial nerve runs here in the facial canal, just beneath the bony surface. In front, as we've seen, the tympanic cavity is continuous with the auditory tube. Up here, behind, It's continuous with a collection of air-filled spaces, the mastoid air cells, which we'll look at in a dry specimen. Here's the tympanic cavity. In this skull, we've made an opening in the upper part of the mastoid process to expose the mastoid air cells. Here are the air cells. The tympanic cavity is through here. The mastoid air cells don't go anywhere. Collectively, they're a dead end. Now we'll put the three auditory ossicles back into the picture. They're the stapes, the incus, and the malleus. We'll start with the tiny stapes, the smallest bone in the body. The stapes consists of a head, which articulates with the incus, an arch that's formed by the posterior crus and anterior crus, and an oval base or footplate which occupies the vestibular window. Here's the vestibular window. We'll add the stapes to the picture. The edge of the footplate is attached to the inside of the window by a membrane that allows it to move. Movement of the stapes sets up sound vibrations in the perilymph of the inner ear. The tendon of the tiny stapedius muscle, which we'll add to the picture, is attached to the head of the stapes from behind.